Let me point out what's happening in the markets first off before we identify and talk about Timor-Leste issues in particular. Are you concerned as a president of a nation about the sell-off we're seeing in global markets and talks of recession and depression?
Yes, certainly extremely worried about another looming deadlock showdown in the U.S. Congress and further bad news about the U.S. economy, Europe situation, and that definitely will have an impact on Asia. And Asia largely has escaped unscathed, but with a prolonged crisis in the U.S., Europe, it's going to affect us and obviously Timor-Leste at the tail end, very, very vulnerable.
Yeah, Timor-Leste has come a long way since independence, 2005. You're looking at $400 per annum per capita income, which was the lowest in the world. Now you're looking at much, much more in 2011. But what about this dependence on energy? What about the Woodside Petroleum project? Is that going ahead?
I believe so. I believe that we will be able to reach agreement with Woodside and the consortium that have invested in Greater Sunrise. It is in our two countries' interest, Australia and Timor-Leste. We have a good agreement, 50-50 share. The question now is about how to bring the gas to the markets,
right,
through a pipeline to Timor-Leste or through FNLG.
That's right.
We remain convinced that the best financial, commercial, technical option is to bring the pipeline to Timor-Leste.
Okay.
The consortium think otherwise.
Yeah, because it'll cost them $5 billion. That's why.
Yeah, that's what they claim,
yeah,
but maybe because they are based on Australian costs, Australian tax, Australian labor costs, we provide much greater incentives in terms of much lower tax. Our tax is lowered in Asia, lowest in Asia after Hong Kong.
Right. We actually have lower taxes here in Hong Kong. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's surprising. Now, Mr. President, when do you think we might see this Woodside deal completed? That's what the market wants to know.
We do have to reach an agreement sometime next year. It is not an intractable problem.
So it can be solved through
This
negotiations.
is not a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And this is not Kashmir problem. So if we are not able to reach an agreement on that, I think it would be, to say the least, a political, intellectual indictment of Woodside and the Timorese authorities.
Okay. Mr. President, some also criticize East Timor as basically overly dependent on oil and gas. In fact, if you take a look at the latest IMF numbers, it looks like 80% of GDP of your country is based on selling oil and gas. You know, oil and gas runs out at some point.
Yes, it will run out.
You need to diversify that.
Yes, it will run out in 40 years' time. I hope that between now and then, and well before, according to our forecast, the strategic development plan, which will run 20 years, by then we will have elevated ourselves from a low middle income to upper middle income country with per capita of over $10,000, with no poverty, no illiteracy, and with a very diversified economy. So I'm optimistic. It is with the oil and gas revenues that we will fuel the development of other sectors of our
some
economy.
say that China is a big buyer of your oil and gas. In fact, hasn't China paid for the presidential palace, paid for the foreign ministry building, etc., etc.?
Well, no. Right now, the sole customer of Bayu Undan, the largest field that provides us with the revenues, is actually Japan, not China.
Oh.
We do have a growing trade with China, but even that, compared with Indonesia, is much below. So there's a lot of, drumbeat by some Australian academics and media. We have a much greater Australian, U.S. presence in Timor-Leste than China. We have an excellent relationship with China. China provides us with some grants, some assistance, but we also purchase some of the most expensive equipment from China. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
A win-win relationship,
It's a
as they
win-win
go.
relationship.
Now, Mr. President, I have to talk to you also about elections. We're expecting some next year.
Yeah.
People want to know, are you going to run for Prime Minister?
For presidency, maybe. I will decide by January, 2 months before the scheduled election, whether I will seek a second term or not. At this stage, I prefer not to.
Okay. What's going to change your mind? What could change your mind?
There is a movement, a ground-swelling movement in the country from young people, people in communities, villages, asking me to run because they believe peace is not completely consolidated, that I'm one capable of achieving that. Maybe they are right. I take into consideration other factors.
Yep.
One factor is my own personal understanding that sometimes I have to decide, I'm the one who decides when, how to leave office. And I received the country in 2006 in an absolute mess.
Yeah.
By the time I leave in 2012, if I leave, I will hand over a country that is on its feet, a double-digit growth the previous 5 years, peace finally rooted in the country, criminality very low, great atmosphere of optimism.
Well, Mr. President, they say public office requires a lot of sacrifice. So
yes,
I'm sure
that's
Timor-Leste is appreciative of the sacrifice you've made over the years. Thank you so much for joining us
Pleasure.
in our studio. It's great to see you right here in Hong Kong.